Okay. Welcome again to another session of Bother the Father. So this is the last one for the month. Just so we're all aware, next week, being the first Tuesday, because that's the 5th, I believe, we're going to have Bother the Father. So I already put in my article for this weekend. The topic's going to be, why do we go to Mass?
Over faith, food, and faith.
They'll be friends, food, and faith. Yeah. I like to approach those topics with more the whys than the whats. And so I think it's interesting. I was watching a YouTube video, as I sometimes do, and there was a great discussion about the whys of going to mass. And I think it was a very startling stat that he threw out that only 10% of Catholics, like Catholics, actually go to mass every Sunday, know why. And so it's like, huh, and that kind of corresponds in some ways to like with the 25% of Catholics when it comes to the real presence, right? So I think that might be an interesting interesting, maybe something put on there, and we'll see. I don't know. So I think that'll be our topic for next week. So Friends Food and Faith is a little bit different. It's more directed. These though are open, so it's open forum. Whatever you want to talk about, whether it be the item of faith, it want to be like a personal thing, like hey, we're doing this policy. Why are you doing that? That's what this is kind of about, right? So open floor to whatever you'd like to speak about.
Well, I have something only because it's been on the news so much in the last 2, 3 weeks. I know what the Catholic Church's position is on IVF, but how about with the Supreme Court in Alabama coming out with their ruling with the embryo?
Yeah. So I think here's the thing about IVF, and I remember when IVF was developed. I think I was high school maybe when it came out, and I kind of my background is as an engineer, right? So I have a very more scientific or technical background, and I kind of took the approach of Dr. Malcolm in Jurassic Park. So there's a great theological line that Dr. Malcolm puts in there, played by Jeff Goldblum. They were talking about like how they were, mixing the DNAs and doing all this stuff and make dinosaurs exist. And, he made this really interesting point. He said, we were focused so much if we could, we never asked if we should. And I guess the theological approach that at least I had at that point was, well, having babies is good, and this helps people have babies. That seems like a good. And if God wouldn't want this to happen, he wouldn't allow it. Now, looking back, that obviously is a very immature and also, I mean, that's kind of the idea I took all through my 20s too. But so looking back, there was sort of a very, not very mature or nuanced approach. Because what that fails to realize that we are all moral agents, right? That technology in itself is rather amoral. The morality comes from people that are using it, producing it, manufacturing it, and how it's being put into society, or even the development for that matter. So maybe just briefly talking about the moral implications when it comes to IVF, because in some ways it seems like an answer to prayers, right? I mean, hey, if I'm an infertile couple and I can go and maybe have my gamete and this tissue taken from me, and they can go to a lab and put it together and make a baby, what's wrong with that? Well, we would certainly not say that that person is they're human. We wouldn't say they don't have a soul. We wouldn't say they're not created by God. That God has some control of this. Obviously, anyone that was created through IVF is a human being made in God's image and likeness, and especially if they're baptized, they are a legitimate child of God. We would never say anything otherwise. However, when it comes to the actual process of IVF, there's some certain moral issues. Like, for instance, well, how are those tissues obtained? Well, it seems, at least for a man, that would be an immoral action to secrete the sperm needed for that. Now, there are other ways to harvest that. I mean, so the moral way could be maybe to engage in the marital act with a perforated condom. Okay, fine. So maybe that's one thing that could be answered that way. The other situation when it comes to the means of it is that you tend to fertilize many eggs, right? Okay, so once that egg is now fertilized, that's a human being. But Not all of those embryos are implanted, meaning they're come to term or even allow gestation. Most of them are frozen. Wow, okay, what are the moral implications of that? Well, of course, we would ask ourselves, do unto others we want to do on ourselves. So if they're human people, which science and the church would say is a human person, we're freezing them. That seems somewhat wrong, even if we do it indefinitely. They're still living, sure, but wow, that seems like not a very good, dignified way of living, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one issue. And now we have freezers full of these embryos that are like, well, now what do we do with them? Because, people, they're becoming issues of like lawsuits, which also points to another moral issue. Is a child a commodity? Well, it seems like in our society, we kind of have two factors when it comes to the marital act. So obviously we understand the marital action is a unifying and procreative act. Now, that's not to say that every marital act ends in procreation. That's insane. No one would actually hold that, right? But even in those instances where it's not procreative, it's still unitive for the two people. It seems like today's society wants to separate those two things. So in other words, I can contracept and have the unity, but even not the unity, without the procreation. Say no to this, but yes to this. And really what this is more yes to is the pleasure of it rather than the actual end of it. Because that's really what contraception is directed towards, is more the pleasure, which is not the end. The reason that action is pleasurable is that people will do it. It's a means. The end really is the unification and the procreative. The other side, though, is saying we want the procreative about the unitive. And that's where IVF kind of falls, right? So in other words, it's not the fact that it's artificial that's a problem. It's the fact that it actually separates that action into separate acts. And finally, the final issue with IVF is that if and when the right embryos are chosen, which is also a big problem because now you're leaving up to a doctor rather than God, once those right ones are implanted, not all of them come to term, which actually means what happens is the ones that aren't gestating or the ones that maybe have defect in birth, they're aborted. Or let's say all of them start to grow and gestate. Well, oftentimes the response to that is, well, if that's too many, you're going to kill yourself. So let's abort some of these babies. Now, people have brought up, well, wait a minute, what if the science gets to the point where implantation of one embryo and that's all you got, and we perfect it to the point where we have the one embryo? Well, you still have to deal with the other issues.
Those other
right,
issues,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, so in reality, it's kind of a moot point, So that's kind of why IVF has these moral implications. Now the question at hand is what to do with all these frozen embryos, right? So there's a lot of debate on that, and it's still kind of an open question. Some theologians say that maybe embryonic adoption is a good way, maybe. Some people would say that we should just keep them frozen indefinitely, especially those that don't have an owner anymore. Let's say the mother or the father died or whatever. So maybe that's the way to go. Well, okay. Again, there may be some issues there. One of my contemporaries who wrote his thesis on this concluded that possibly the best option would be to baptize them all and then defrost and let God determine, miraculously or otherwise, what happens at that point. Now, that's a very philosophically and theologically kind of sound argument, I think, because, again, our direction is not towards the here and now, it's toward the afterlife. But is that a willful destruction? He might argue that it's not willful because you're not necessarily directly killing. You're kind of just letting nature happen. Or, and maybe another way of looking at this is he might make this akin to end of life issues, right? So, in other words, pulling the plug on someone, is there a circumstance where that would be morally acceptable? The answer to that is yes, but they're very nuanced, right? So, for instance, what the church would teach is if you have to go through what they call extraordinary means to keep someone alive, you could make an argument that that would be undignified and maybe cruel. And typically, what the church makes distinction between ordinary and extraordinary would be if you oxygen, food, water, right? So if there's a burden in providing one of those three aspects, possibly you could say that it would be morally acceptable to let nature happen, right? So those are usually the issue. Now there are extremes too, and even that has kind of developed over time because again, as science develops, these extraordinary means become less and less. So back in the when this was first being discussed, this was happening in the Middle Ages. It was kind of argued that amputation could be an extraordinary means of keeping somebody alive, and so therefore might be more amicable or more acceptable to let the person die. Well, because, if you think about it this way, they didn't have anesthetic. They didn't have, good ways of amputating
Right.
someone back then. So it's like, well, I mean, maybe that would be.
Didn't have artificial limbs.
Right. So again, this has been a doctrine that's developed over time, but it's always come down to extraordinary and ordinary, right? And so in this case, would it be extraordinary to kind of constantly keeping these freezers going? The other thing to factor too is actually legitimately cost. So, like for instance, an IVF session is last time I heard it was like $40,000. And also, what typically happens is the first session never actually hits. So you're close to spending 6 figures to have a child, where maybe it's not proper, right? Or maybe, and it's hard because like when I counsel infertile couples, first off, it's kind of interesting because typically they're actually centered around things like contraception. So oftentimes what happens when women become infertile, there is a correlation, maybe not a causation, but definitely there's a link between use of the pill and that. And now typically when women go off the pill for a while, their cycle tends to regulate and then they can, engage, and usually it happens. But some, it doesn't happen. That's why natural family planning, NAPRO technologies are very kind of helpful in these things because they can actually help women determine these things and also take precaution and steps to maybe become fertile so they can actually engage, right? So, but even those are not guarantees. And so I've had a few couples that I've counseled when it comes to these things, and sometimes the answer is, motherhood takes many different forms. We're all called to motherhood or fatherhood in some way. Me too. Even though I'm not married, I mean, they call me father for a reason.
Right.
So, but we're all kind of called to that in some way. So even a married couple that is infertile, well, there's spiritual adoptions, right? There's ways you can engage in your life as a married couple that is fruitful, if not naturally, spiritually, right? And so maybe it's good to focus on that. And that usually brings a lot of solace. But that also can be difficult because the temptation, and I think every couple I've talked to is that the temptation is, IVF, that seems like a way. And it's like, it seems like you could have a child that way, yeah. But what is that going to do to your soul? What is that going to do to your relationship? Right? There's a reason for these things. And that's kind of the struggle, I think, with anybody when tragedy happens. Well, God, where are you in this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's present. And this is happening for a reason. I don't know what that is. Only he does. And that's what's hard for us as humans too, right? So that's briefly kind of what the discussion is around IVF right now. And to tell the truth, I'm very happy with that verdict when it came down from Alabama, because I mean, it's, if anything, it's recognizing a human person. Praise God. Good, right? So that's, I think, a good start.
So what can compound that is those that then seek surrogacy.
Yeah.
That's even a step further in the.
Yeah, surrogacy is a little bit, but it is different than like adoption. So embryonic adoption would be implanted, so there's still something good about that. But it's like, it'd be akin to, like, let's say a mother that breastfeeds another child, right? I mean, so there's nothing necessarily morally wrong with that. It's providing nourishment. It's, you know, but even that, there's a moral question about that too. And that's, I think, why this contemporary didn't go with that. Because again, it is kind of looking at a child as a commodity. And surrogacy kind of takes that to the next level. Because now I'm actually paying somebody else. I'm renting a womb. I'm renting someone else's eggs. I'm renting someone else's, stuff, or buying it quite out, for the development of this child. I think what's not talked about often with the surrogacy issue is really about the amount of chemicals and the amount of drugs that are put into the woman to develop enough eggs to be harvested in these situations. There's some great documentaries out there that slipped my mind right now that kind of talk about these things, and also these horror stories of these women that have gone through these things, and in some ways also it ruins their fertility. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Also for the child, because the child should have the right to know his mother. Here he's got maybe 3 mothers. He's got the egg
Right.
mother, the womb mother,
Right.
and then
And that's another thing about
Social
marriage
mother.
that people don't tend to understand. Like, we get so focused on the individuals, right? So the spouses in that respect, but what people don't tend to talk about as much, and that's probably understandable in our society with everything, the way things are going, the right of the child. That if a child is brought into that relationship, however is brought into that relationship, that bond of marriage is directed towards that child, right? So, right, like you're saying, Greg, I know who my mother and father is. I know they love each other in that bond, and that love can help nurture me and foster me and help me, right? But when you have these kind of transactions, so to speak, and even to the point where, like, what is the actual relationship, between this child and their so-called parents? I think there's a lot of opportunity for problems there. Now, I think but it's also a little different than like adoption, right?
yeah.
So I think adoption is not necessarily making a commodity. It's actually typically directed towards providing a loving home. Now, that's not to say it can't be abused either. I mean, I think there are problems there too in some ways. That may be a different discussion topic,
Yeah.
but surrogacy for sure. I mean, just because again, the way that the way the process works, it's not good for one's personal health. But then, there's these question of what about the rights of the child.
Yeah, you're just ripping it from
Yeah.
its mother's mother.
Right.
And,
And I think any mother will tell you that when they have a child, there's a bond there, no matter what, right? Even if that woman was with that child for adoption, she's always going to be a mother. That child is always going to exist. That relationship never changes. And so, it's got to be difficult.
even if it's not her egg.
Right. I think so. Because I think this, genetically speaking, they say, because there's so much sharing within the womb
Right.
of these things, right?
Fluids.
I mean, that may be the biological explanation, but we would say also, well, there's a nurturing aspect of that that's spiritual too. And so, how can you just like sever that?
Certainly a lot to think about.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. And fortunately, the church has, so praise God about that too.
Yeah.
But these are. Some of these things are kind of really open discussion. I think surrogacy, the church teaches that should be avoided. Again, for this, it's more about the commodity. A child is not like something like a chair you buy.
Yeah.
A child is supposed to be a gift from God, and that's how we need to look at them. And if we're not, then that means we need to look inside ourselves in some way and say, what's going on here? And maybe the answer to that question is, can I have a child or should I have a child, is no. Maybe that is the answer. And so maybe you're called to do something else. Now, what's kind of fascinating sometimes about these things is that typically after these kind of happen, we have these discussions, they end up having a baby like within a year or two. It's like, okay, fine. But I've had some that haven't. but they have turned to adoption, and praise God. And so there, like I said, there's other ways. But the adoption process right now is also very, I think depending on what state you're in, can be very problematic.
Very
Yeah.
long and expensive.
Well, not only that, but also too, like I think I know sometimes what I've seen is this struggle of morality between, well, the state wants me, let's say, to say that if my child starts developing um, transgender tendencies or something, then I need to support that. Father, how can I, in good conscience, say that? Yeah, that's tough. That's tough, right? I mean, because yeah.
So if you adopt a child
Hmm.
and you're the child's legal parent guardian, and then if the child is 10 or 11 years old and decides that it wants to do something to its body,
Yes.
you're required not to be able to.
There are certain states that require that. And they'll say that if you don't uphold this, your child can be taken away from you. But before you even adopt, you have to sign that you say, I will do that. Now, I think Catholic orphanages and stuff won't. And there's still that separation there. But I think the problem there, I think you don't have too many Catholic orphanages anymore.
Yeah.
And so really it's handled by the state primarily. And so that, yeah, it's rough, you know, because, well, do I lie or,
right?
You know, well,
You're in a conundrum.
yeah, it is a conundrum. Now, I don't think Missouri really is in that situation right now, but the problem is also too, I think a lot of people are going out other places to adopt. And so where you're adopting is where they actually have these type of laws. And so it can be a struggle, problematic.
So I guess that raises the question, should there be laws to protect well, in the case where the court said the embryo is alive, then yeah, there should be laws.
Yeah.
But for the moral issues, you're going to find folks that don't have a problem with that. Should there be laws?
Well, I mean, when it comes to law, when it comes to law, I mean, we would ideally law would be in a court of objective truth. And so our understanding of law is always about, well, there's always an objectivity to law, right? So ultimately what's good for you or me would be good for everybody, right? So a child who is suffering from an identity issue, whether it be mental or emotional, I think reason would dictate that doesn't mean they should mutilate themselves to conform with that idea or with that emotion. Unfortunately, reason has been out the window with law since about probably 1970 or so, right? I mean, so it's been that way for a while. You know, so what is the answer there? Well, I mean, I guess it's electing politicians that are in line with reason, but where can you find one of those these days?
I mean, I'm referring back to the IVF too, because now all these laws are being.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be definitely looked at from the Supreme Court standpoint. But I mean, I think the Supreme Court has already kind of decided a lot of these things. Like, you know, that's kind of related to abortion in many ways. And so that was the interesting thing about Dobbs, and that people get wrong, I think, about the Dobbs decision, is Dobbs did not make abortion illegal. What Dobbs did was just say it's up to the states now. They get the call. And that's kind of scary because we've seen certain places like in Ohio and Kansas and other places where you have these laws going to the polls, these amendments, and they're being enshrining abortion. Now, even all the way up to birth in some of these places, which is kind of insane. But I think part of that's been a problem of the pro-life movement not taking a stance of gradual movement. So what happened in Ohio and places like Kansas, where these laws were put in place, was instead of saying, let's take a lower measure, let's say like that cuts abortion off at like 3 months or 2 months, and just saying, nope, not at all. We're done. Now, I think that was kind of a reaction to Dobbs in some way. And because, I mean, and as pro-life people, we say, yeah, abortion is wrong regardless. Every instance that would be wrong. But from a political standpoint, there is a morality of saying, let's take the lesser of the two evils. So if there's something on the table when it comes to election or laws enshrinement of a whole, whole hog, abortion is legal up to whatever, and maybe one where we can say, let's limit it. I think we have a moral obligation, let's at least limit it. Because that's reasonable. Because then we can work on getting it. And that takes a lot more effort. The problem is you don't have enough time to put that effort out with a lot of these things. And so right now, Missouri, for instance, we have these ballot initiatives that are coming out in November, kind of looking at the same thing. And there's like 12 of them. And they're very vague in how they're putting those out, right? So they don't talk about abortion, they talk about women's health care. And they talk about, parasitic, events. And, they're euphemisms, of course.
Yeah.
But if people don't understand that, it's like, oh yeah, who does not? Who doesn't want women to be healthy? Of course we do, right? I want women to be healthy, so sure, let's vote on that, right? I'll even vote for it because I want women to be healthy, right? So that's why we bishops here in Missouri and also in the individual parishes are getting that word out. Now, when it comes to these ballot initiatives, we should just reject them. That'd be ideal. But if they are put on the ballot, we want to choose the lesser of the two evils, or all the evils, which means if we limit it, good. But that's, I think, just where our society. But I think there's also hope too. I mean, that's one thing I kind of get going to things like March for Life and working on the Respect Life Apostolate is that the future generations, I think, get it. And I think the ones that are really kind of pushing this stuff are the more vocal ones, and it is a minority. It really is. So it's unfortunate that they're kind of making ground here. But again, I think they're doing that because they're putting these in terms that are people that if you vote against it, you sound mean or you sound irrational, right?
Yeah.
So if a woman is suffering from a parasitic thing affecting their womb, don't they have the right to health care? Well, yeah, of course, yeah, sure, yes. Who wouldn't say that? Well, but what the problem behind that is the parasitic thing is an embryo. They won't say that in the directives, but that's what they're getting at. So beware when it comes, especially this year, when it comes to the election year, that
we have to make sure we educate our people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do.
Because you hear so much in the news reports and the newspapers and all, and I know you can't believe.
Well, the more you listen, the more you're confused.
Yeah, that's kind of
That's
true.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, I mean, that's also kind of a tactic is when you start changing language and definition, you can make whatever you want. And so then I can put whatever I want out there, and then whatever I mean is what's going to be on there. Well, that
Make it sound good.
yeah, how do you spin it? Well, women's health care sounds a lot better than tearing a child from their womb and killing it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just be honest. That's what it is. Great. Anything? We cover this up. Any other questions, follow-ups, or anything? I mean, we're getting deep here tonight. It's pretty good.
Very deep, yeah.
So what's one of your favorite saints?
Oh, it's funny. We're actually coming up on my confirmation saint was Saint Joseph, which, by the way, on March 19th, even though it falls in Lent, we're exempt on those days. So usually March 19th and March 25th, because they're solemnities, right? We can't fast on feast days. So even if those days fell on a Friday, you'd be exempt from the Lenten practices on those days, which is kind of cool. So Saint Joseph is my confirmation saint, and I think I've chosen him because I thought it was really humble And this is where I really knew the theology behind Mary and all this other stuff too. But when I was 13, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I would have taken a woman into my home that had a child that wasn't mine. You know?
No, that's a great point,
Yeah.
and that's the whole, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
that humility and that like kind of love.
Absolutely.
What you realize about Saint Joseph though was that he actually believed her, because the only Joseph of course doesn't say any words in the Bible. He's only mentioned really 3 times. Once in Matthew, Luke in the infancy narratives, and last time he's mentioned is when they went to Jerusalem and Jesus got lost. Then he dies. It's like, okay, well, great, don't hear anything from him. We do hear more about him in some of the what they call apocryphal gospels. I don't know if we talked about this last time. I can't remember. These all tend to run together sometimes, so I'm sorry if we already talked about it. But in the Gospel of James, for instance, there's this story about how Mary and Joseph become betrothed. And that's actually interesting enough how we get the names of Joachim and Anne. So Joachim and Anne aren't mentioned anywhere in the scripture either, right? But they are mentioned in this apocryphal gospel called the Gospel of James. So it's funny because it's almost like Odyssean the way this happens. So Joachim, realizing Mary, who she is, a virtuous young girl, without sin, immaculate, decides to have a competition. And the competition is if a man who's worthy of her grabs this staff and the staff starts to flower, that is a sign from God that they're meant to be betrothed to Mary. So of course everyone in Galilee comes and they try and nothing happens. And then of course then Joseph comes and grabs the staff and of course starts to flower. Now if anyone knows anything about the story of Odysseus, the Odyssey, right, a Greek tale, there was kind of a similar competition between Odysseus' wife and the other suitors. After he comes back, they all thought he was dead. They're trying to pursue the wife, and the wife had these competitions. What gives us some credence, though, is that the same thing happened with Aaron, Moses' brother. That the sign of him being the high priest was that he grabbed the staff and started to flower. And that staff was then put in the Ark of the Covenant. So did it happen? Maybe. I mean, it seems like there's some connection. But there's other things in James' Gospels that are like odd. Like, for instance, there's story. James goes a lot about the time in Nazareth. Because James, of course, was a cousin of Jesus. So, would have maybe had familiarity with it. But there was a story about how Jesus, as a child, had a dispute with his friend and got angry with him and smote him, and then repented and then brought the child back to life. Now, the theological problem with that would be is that God cannot kill, right? That's outside of God's capacity. And God also cannot repent, even though we hear that in the Old Testament, but that's we have to understand we hear the language when it comes like human emotion. That's kind of the way the human author trying to explain things. But God doesn't have like anger in the same way like humans have anger, or like, he doesn't have like, repentance. He just doesn't do that. There's always a plan to the plan. So he always has that in mind as it goes forward. A lot of these things that we experience as maybe wrath or something is based on our human choice because we have free will and God doesn't want evil to happen, but he does allow it for reasons, right? So, okay. So the Gospel of James is where we kind of get the names of Joachim and Anne. And so Joseph, though, the only word that explains, that actually describes him in the entire scripture is righteous. So if we understand what that means in the context of first century Judaism, a righteous person was someone that followed the law. So when it comes to Joseph and the discussion about him divorcing Mary quietly, well, technically, if Joseph were following the law, Mary should have been stoned. She was with child that wasn't her husband's. The law is pretty clear about that, right?
He was right with God, not the law.
But see, that's the problem with the God and the law were the same, right? So because to be called righteous, you have to be in line with the law, not necessarily God, right? That's a very interesting word. So that leaves us with two kind of scenarios here. Either Joseph had compassion for Mary and wanted her to go and live her life and, you know, be free. But that wouldn't be righteous. That would be compassionate. Or Joseph believed her. And what he's really saying in like divorcing her quietly was, go find somebody better. I can't raise God. I'm not your guy. Right? And it wasn't until he received the angel in the dream, Gabriel, that he said, okay, well, I guess God's going to be with me, so good. Let's do this. So that always kind of struck me. And it was interesting that I took it as a confirmation name. Now, I will say, though, if I were to do it over again, knowing what I know now, or if I were getting confirmed, let's say today, I probably would take St. Augustine. St. Augustine had a past. He had a good mom. And he had to do a lot of converting to find Jesus, right? And I personally, I was always Catholic. I always went to Mass on Sunday. I was at the bare minimum. But it wasn't until I started discerning the priesthood, got into the seminary, and started learning about these things that I really started kind of like growing in my faith, I think. So I see a little bit of Augustine in me in that respect. Right? Because, you know, I also have a history. I mean, I didn't come right out of high school like some of my brothers. I lived a life in some way, right? So, but I have a great amount of respect and appreciation for my brothers who did come out of high school, because I know I was not ready at that point. And I think if I did enter the seminary in 18, I probably wouldn't last very long in the college program. Pretty sure. So those two. I mean, I think those two. Yeah. I just learned a little bit today about the saint. Today was Gregory Narek. So hey, happy feast day. There's a lot of Gregories out there. He actually was an Armenian priest of a schismatic group. So it's funny. Armenia actually was the first country to actually make Christianity legal, and even their national. This happened in 303. They were outside the empire, so they weren't like, you know, didn't have that control from the emperor. But they didn't accept, I think it was the Council of Chalcedon, where it talked about Jesus having two wills and two natures. And so they broke apart. They've been called the Apostolic Armenian Church. They were founded the apostles, still have valid orders, all that good stuff. It wasn't until like a few decades ago, like in the 80s, that they actually re-established with the Catholic Church and are now called the Armenian Catholic Church.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So at that time, then this Gregory Narek, who was made a saint in the Catholic Church and a doctor, and we celebrate his day today. But we just started celebrating that, like I think just last year was put in the calendar. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Pretty cool.
That's actually it's kind of a sad state when it comes to a lot of these Orthodox churches. Like, there was a lot of hope that within my lifetime, the Orthodox and the Catholics come together as one again. And that was going really well until about 2008. And that caused some problems. So for those of you who don't know, 2008, all the Orthodox churches were being represented by the Patriarch of Constantinople, the head of the Byzantine Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox. And so the dialogues were happening between the Vatican and there was a lot of leeway going until the Patriarch of Moscow decided to break apart. And he was like, well, wait a minute, you're not representing us. Moscow is the new Rome. It went from Rome to Constantinople to Moscow. It's like, so they broke apart. And so now the conundrum for the Vatican is, who do we talk to? Because if we talk to Moscow, that's going to alienate the Greeks. And if we talk to the Greeks, it's going to alienate Moscow. So the directive was, why don't you guys come together and then we'll come back.
Then we'll resume.
Yeah, right. So that hasn't happened, at least not yet.
See it happen soon.
What's going on in Russia right now? Probably at least not in the next few years. So I don't know. We'll see. You know. So yeah, there's a few. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I've noticed a few more, but I mean, it's like those are kind of my two big ones I go to. I like Thomas Aquinas too. The Summa is an excellent book, although boy, to read all of it, I haven't read all of it. That's for sure. I don't know anyone who really has, except for maybe some Dominicans. I like JP too. He was the only pope I knew up until I was like 27. So, yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, he was like the only pope I really knew. I mean, he was pope for a long, long time.
78 to 2005.
Remember when he came? I lived in Chicago when I grew up as a little boy. When he came there, it was, we had Led Zeppelin and things come, but nothing as big as God. Oh, and I mean, I'm seriously, I'm like, I mean, they shut down the whole city. It was awesome, right? It was.
The big Polish community in Chicago.
Oh yeah.
I have mixed feelings about John Paul too.
Yeah? You talk about him?
Well, I really think he handled the whole priest pedophile thing wrong. I really do.
Yeah, and I think there's some critique there, I think, too. But also, I mean, here's the other thing, though, Ken, and not to play devil's advocate, but like, he was what, 97 when that all broke? I mean, he was 3 years away from his deathbed, and he had Parkinson's and everything. I mean, there's all, it's funny. There's this old joke when it comes to the Vatican. If the Vatican ever says that a pope has the flu, they've been dead for 3 years. Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we just heard that over the weekend.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Francis.
Yeah. So I mean, who was actually doing what when? I don't know.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
But I try to rectify in my mind, putting this in the corporate world,
Right.
because that's where I came from, was
Yeah.
the corporate world. And I know the guy who owned the company that I worked for, he didn't have a clue what everything was going on. He only knew what the underlings wanting to know, the
Yeah.
so-called power.
Right.
And his decisions ended up costing us the company. He had to sell it.
Yeah.
And it's just because he didn't know what the hell
Yeah.
he was doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can see both sides of it. I
Right.
can, which leads me to believe then, the Pope was chosen, but maybe we should have a term limit on the Pope like we should have on the president, and age and all of that, but we got through it.
Here's the question: who's going to enforce it?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think there's something said about having wisdom, but yeah, I think like with any institution, the people you surround yourself with are really important.
I can remember exactly when he was elected, because Cheryl and I were on our way going on Highway 40. She had a doctor's appointment or something, and it comes across the news station. We have a new pope, and he's what was he, 55?
Yeah, he was young.
Very young.
Yeah,
And we were excited about it. We figured, well, that he'll be more worldly, know what's going on in the world or whatever, and that. And I know he spread the faith and all the traveling and the countries he saw and all of that,
Gave us divine mercy.
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
not for me to judge.
Yeah. No, I think with anything, I mean, that's why I've often had this discussion with some brother priests and other people too. Like, I know there was one priest in our parish who was accused, and apparently it wasn't. So they have what they call credible, then they have substantial, right? And the credible situation, the bar there is just like, is it possible it happened? And there was the priest that was there. So now he never, as far as I know, nothing ever happened with anyone there. As a matter of fact, I loved him. He was really good at talking about the servers. He was really good at the servers. He would actually, he took us out to breakfast. So if you show up for 6:30 mass every morning to serve all week, on Friday you take out the breakfast for school. Loved him. Nothing ever happened. Never felt uncomfortable around him, whatever. supposedly, and this is all, I don't know exactly if this is the case, but supposedly what happened was, there was in one of his former parishes, there was a single mom who had 3 kids, and she had to work one night, and she asked the father to babysit. Now, this was back in the 70s. You know, even in the 80s, that was probably like not necessarily like considered to be uncouth. Today, I think you would be, hopefully priests would be like, no. You know, but back then it was sort of like, well, okay, you know, I understand your situation. I want to serve. I want to help. Sure. Because, I mean, like, what am I going to do, right? I mean, whatever. So apparently, one of the children was being bullied at school. And so father was trying to show him some moves, some wrestling moves to defend himself against these bullies. Apparently, there was an accusation from that, and there you go. Now, I don't know.
In my wife's former life, working, she was a secretary at several Catholic churches, and the one family at the one church, they had several children, but 2 or 3 little girls.
Mm-hmm.
And after Mass, after the priest would process out of Mass, these little girls would just come running at this priest and just jump at him and put their legs around him. And
How old were they?
7, 8, 9.
Oh.
But they were still, well, anyway, the priest, everybody could see it. They knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And so the priest had to have a meeting with the parents. He said, you got to talk to your daughters.
Yeah.
They cannot do
Right.
that. Because he said, I know it's nothing and you know
Right.
it's nothing,
Right.
but
It's the optics, right? Yeah, it's the
you know,
optics.
Like,
and he
right.
said,
Yeah.
and so it was stopped.
Right.
It was stopped.
You know, I get kind of self-conscious about the kids here, which is different than anywhere I've ever been. They love to run up and hug you.
Yes, they do.
And now I'm always very clear, like if I'm outside in front of everybody, that's one thing, but I don't, maybe one tap, okay, that's, yes, because I'm conscious of that too. And this is how conscious I am of it. Right after I got ordained, I was over at my parents' house. This is before they moved next to St. Gabriel. And my nieces were over there. And at the time, man, I think there was like two and one, you know, kids. My dad we're sitting in the living room, doing whatever. My dad gets up, walks out of the room. I think nothing of it. About 15 minutes later, he comes in through the front door. I'm like, what? Where'd you go? Because I went to go get a paper. And I said, you can never do that to me. Like, what are you talking about? You can't leave me alone with these girls. What do you mean? You're an uncle. I'm like, no, I know. No, I know. But the scenario goes through my mind. Now, this may be irrational. It may never happen. But let's say my brother-in-law wants to leave my sister. All he's got to say is, he touched them. My sister never sees him again. Right? So, no. Right? And he's like, what? I'm like, Dad, I was like, look, we both know I would never do that. But
In today's
today's exactly right.
society.
Today,
Because-
the lawyers would be fighting each other. for
because-
the case.
Because that's what I'm saying. When it comes to like the difference between credibility and substantiality, credibility is all that's really necessary these days, right? And that's unfortunate because I'm very much on guard about those things.
That's why servers don't go to the gravesite.
Right. Yeah, you mean in the cars? Yeah. We can walk down there. That's no problem.
Not everybody's buried there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, but when it comes back to these things, obviously, you know, that's why I always like when it comes to these, I just pray I'm never asked to become a bishop because like I kind of put myself in that situation. Let's say it's the 80s or 70s. I get this someone come to me and say this priest has been accused of this. My first thought is, wow, what? You know, because here's the problem: as a bishop, I have an obligation to the faithful, and I have an obligation to this priest. Right? What do I do? Well, you know, let's send them for some rehabilitation. Let's send them and get them, you know, fixed up and whatever. And okay, not also too. The other problem we're dealing with, I have a priest shortage. You know, that started happening around the 80s. You know, so okay, I'm going to send this person off and get evaluated. They come back a clean bill of health. Okay, well, good. we're going to put you over in this parish. Great. Then there's another accusation.
Yeah, because if you jump to conclusion, you're ruining
Right.
someone's life.
Right. Now, that's not to say there weren't some really bad decisions made by bishops and probably should have known better. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that as a bishop, that's why I pray I'm never asked to be one. Because that kind of thing that's just insane to me.
You better
know.
stop praying.
Stop praying. I'm praying I never become a bishop.
I know.
She wants you.
That's
to-
what she
No,
said.
I'm just saying you're praying not to. I'm just saying you
Watch
might
out,
become
I'll
one.
Are you countering my
No,
prayer?
I am not. I'm just saying I know other people that prayed they would never become one and became one.
Seriously, I should pray to be one. They'll never be one. That's a good idea.
Reverse thinking.
Oh, I should even like promote that, shouldn't I? No, you're right. That's what I should do.
Because really good bishops don't want to become bishops.
I know somebody that's a bishop and didn't want to be a bishop.
Me too.
Me too.
It's the same guy.
Yeah, he's related to me. I know that one. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's the same guy, because I can remember, and when Bishop Rice's first parish was presentation,
I know.
okay, and I don't know, he was very self-conscious when he started losing his hair. And I said, well, that little spot back there, that's where that little bean's gonna go someday.
Oh.
He looked at me and he says, don't you ever
Ever
say
say
that
that.
or think that. Well,
Mhm.
I reminded him of that. And of course, then when he was made a bishop, I couldn't wait till I saw him,
Pretty awesome.
You know, funny enough though, Ken, that's when I first re-engaged my call.
Really?
Yeah. It was after that. It was at the reception at that after that mass.
That's great.
He took me aside and said, "Mark, you know, I always thought you were going to become a priest." I'm like, ha, that's hilarious. That ship is sailing. Then he did something very, very clever. He said, "Well, you know what? I got this retreat next month, and I just need to fill a bed. Can you help me out?" I'm like, sure, no problem.
He was already at work.
Oh, he was a very stellar. I didn't work with him, but I say I think he did a good job as a vocation director.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he did. He got me, that's for sure.
Got a lot of people.
So
We were crazy about him at presentation.
yeah. He comes to town pretty often though.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I see him, I'll see him in June.
Yeah, I just talked to
Not
him.
sooner.
I was talking to him last week. So
You'll have to get him to come up here.
well, he's asked a few times like if we can celebrate Mass. I'm like, yeah, let me know whenever.
Would he
you
have to have special permission to do that?
For
Since
me.
Well, just from you. He doesn't need Rodansky's.
He needs a letter of standing, but I mean, I think he's good.
I
For
could
it.
write that.
Technically, here's the thing. I need that. So it's funny. It's weird. He was driving through a few weeks ago. He called me. It's like, I'm gonna go anoint so and so over at Mother Council. Is that okay? I'm like, yeah. I realized he was asking for permission because I'm the pastor. I'm just like, that's hilarious. I was like, you know what? You don't have to ask me permission. You know that, right? He's like,
Lynn
yeah,
Stewart.
yeah, Liz Lynn, yeah.
Yeah,
And he was like,
Father Dolan mentioned that at the funeral mass, that Bishop could call him the day before the funeral, say he couldn't be there, but he wanted a
We did
family
more
member. He
local
was
than
extending
anybody I
his
know.
sympathies.
oh yeah, no, it was so funny. I'm just like, you don't have to ask me. He's like, no, I do. I'm like, I know, but you don't. It's like, all right. 'Cause he also, he asked me.
There's a chain of command, right?
Well, yeah, but it's like, come on, whatever, you know. It is jurisdictional. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it pleased him.
Yes. Well, it was. I just thought it was very funny.
Yeah.
I just kind of laughed a little bit.
Well, he would laugh.
Now he does have to get Archbishop Brzezinski's permission to use a crozier here, because the crozier is a symbol of the authority of the area. So he has to get permission from the local bishop to do that.
So he uses it, so he's got permission.
Well, no, what I'm saying is he doesn't necessarily have to either. So he can still wear the mitre because he's the bishop, but the use of the crozier, that means I'm in control of this area. I'm the shepherd here, right? Yeah. So that's usually more formality, but yeah.
Yeah.
He's usually pretty good about that too. So,
There was a bishop that came to presentation. He was fundraising. He was from overseas someplace. And and he was going to be staying in the St. Louis area, going to different parishes. And Well, boy, Father Dolan hooked onto that real quick. Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna leave for a week. You can have the rectory and say the masses and that, and he didn't have a crozier with him at all, but he wore the little cap and whatever, that you knew he was a bishop.
Yeah, Zucchetto.
He was a good guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, bishop can wear in the mass can wear the Zucchetto and they can wear the mitre, but they have to get permission to use the crozier.
And one day he said to one of the ladies after mass, "Where's the nearest Walmart?" And she says, "Well, I'll just walk down there. She says, "Wait a minute, Bishop. It's too far to walk. I'll take you." And so she did. And then he bought a bunch of things to send back to him, and he mailed them. But we had him 2 years in a row.
Oh.
And he just loved coming to see. And this lady who befriended him, they became very good friends, and I guess they still correspond over the computer and that.
Yeah, I just booked a priest coming here. We got a couple of visits over the summer. Apparently, there's about 2 or 3 different organizations that come to preach, and yeah. So I'm thinking maybe take some time then, but we'll see. I don't know.
Well, you should take some time. All work makes a dull boy.
Yeah, I didn't take a vacation until this last summer after I got ordained, because we had COVID. I figured that was kind of a vacation enough. I mean, we took a lot of time off of that. But yeah, but I thought also was going to be sticking where I was too. So I was like, okay, great. And then yeah, here we go. So
just get one of your priest friends and you just go somewhere.
yeah, I went on back to Charleston, just kind of go down there and visit. And I was hoping to maybe celebrate mass at the parish down there where I stayed. I wasn't able to because they took over, an order took it over or something. So it's kind of an interesting scenario. Yeah.
Charleston,
South Carolina.
yeah.
Yeah, I spent 2 years in Seattle, 6 months in Taiwan, and most of my career, 7 years, was down in Charleston. So,
Never been.
oh, it's a great town. It's great.
I've been to Seattle.
Yep. Yeah, usually, except for there's about 2 months in the summer where it's nice. But then you get rain between like September and May.
So then is it gorgeous? Like beautiful
Oh
green
yeah,
lush?
yeah, very lush. Yeah, I mean, on the summer days it was great because you can see like Mount Rainier and like anywhere in the city, and the nice thing there is you're about 2 hours away from the mountains, 2 hours away from the beach.
Right on, I like
Yeah,
that.
so it's not too bad. But the sound is really nice. A lot of different lakes and kind of channels and stuff up there. As a matter of fact, the Boeing facility that I worked in was like right on sound, which is kind of neat.
And Father Dolan had friends there. He would go every year, at least 1 week, sometimes more often. And they had access to a big luxury cruiser.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They would spend the night actually on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He loved going there.
Last time I was up there was where they had these thing called Sea Fest. So it's kind of like it's usually around like 4th of July weekend. They have like this big thing around all in the sound, like fireworks and boat shows and airplane shows. It was really kind of neat. And a buddy of mine, my former lead, he took me out on the boat and it was really fun. And I was wearing the collar.
That's fun.
That's kind of neat. It was fun. No, it's cool. Yeah, Seattle was a great town. I didn't, there's high depression there apparently because of the weather. I didn't really mind it. I thought it was fine. I didn't really, I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the suicide rate I think is higher or something.
It was
the depression.
It's one of the higher in the country.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think they attribute that to I mean, it is gray from September to May. I mean, it's not even rainy. It's just like clouds constantly moist, right?
Just gloomy and gray.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing kind of was interesting about there is that they're not used to snow. You think like that far north they get some snow, but they don't. And so when they got any snow whatsoever, everything shut down. Yeah. And so I was shocked because I came in one day. It wasn't even like snowing. It was like maybe frosty. And I guess they get really worried about black ice, and I get that too. But just drive slower. It's not like that big a deal. And so I got to work, and I was the only one there. And I was like, okay, I guess what should I do? And like, well, you can go home, I guess, or you can work your 8 hours. I'm like, all right, well, so I just worked 8 hours and then went home. So
that was we went on a cruise to Alaska, and we had to go to Seattle for it. So we went out 2 or 3 days early so we could explore the city a little bit. And that was my first experience. We get there, we get to the hotel, and we're walking through the city. And each street where there was a crossing, traffic lights and all, you're watching, okay, you can walk, stop, but you can hear this beep, beep, beep. Well, here we finally figured it out. It was for blind people that were out.
Oh, right,
walking
yeah.
To get across the streets when
Yep.
that was their signal to go or not to go. And we actually saw that. That's how we figured it out. But
There's a few of those like down South City too.
Sounds like a loud owl.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it here.
Yeah. There are some down South. I mean, I think all the
Yeah, when you
More the
first
modern
hear it,
ones.
you're not sure what it is.
My first experience, actually. And I love the fish market there in Seattle. I could spend an hour there, what we probably did, watching them throw them fish around.
Well, any more questions or comments or concerns or heresies or anything
Well,
else?
thank you. We didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No. Well, that's what this is for. So good. Yeah.
Yes, we did.
So next week will be French food today. We'll have it still here. I'll provide some food, but if you want to bring anything too, feel free.
So what is that? What is it?
So it's called Friends, Food, and Faith. So it's basically kind of a potluck, but it's more of a directed topic.
Okay.
And so we're going to talk about why we go to
Why we
Mass.
go to Mass.
So that'll be next week, same time, same place, but different topic.
And bring some.
If you want to bring
If you
something,
want.
more than welcome, right? And if you want to bring some like Lenten fare, that's okay too. Might have some pretzels and water. We'll see what we can do. Beer is very Lenten though too. We'll see what we can do.
It is,
Yeah, that's
isn't
true.
it?
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone have a good night. We'll see you later.
Maybe we should have a call-in option. People can call in.
Well, I was wondering about that too, but I don't know how that's going to actually work.